This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with Marin Ireland about Dope Thief. How are you today?
I am good. How are you?
Good. I'm a big fan of yours from Sneaky Pete, Justified City Primeval, Light from Light, which we'll talk about later, I hope. Um, Maybe not what you expected, but I'm thrilled to see you back on this show. And I love how angry this character is and how she doesn't really have a voice to express that. And I'm curious about you tackling that unique challenge.
Yeah. I mean, Peter Craig and I talked early on where he was like, the metaphor of it is obviously pretty on the surface, but she loses her voice and then she sort of gains her voice back again. But I was nervous early on about actually damaging my vocal cords trying to emulate that. So I actually got in touch with a speech therapist that I'd worked with once on another project. And so she helped me figure out a way to like place that and work with that so that I didn't actually create such an obstacle for my own self that I damaged my tender vocal cords in the process of doing this thing. But it was exciting. It was fun. It's always fun to have that kind of challenge as an actor, something you've never done before, and something that's a physical challenge to overcome. It definitely helped me sort of tap right into that rage at not being able to communicate and feeling stuck um, in a real physical, grounded way.
I always like to go into new shows knowing nothing whatsoever. So I didn't know if you were supposed to be in the show. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty quick for her to appear and then just get killed off like that. So I had a suspicion that like this wouldn't be the end for you because it would seem strange to have like just show up and then immediately like stabbed in the neck and just gone.
Yeah.
So I was happy to see that. But this show is so interesting because it really does have a sense of humor, especially from Brian and from your character, but it's
Yeah.
also very violent and very dark. What is the mood like on set when you're shooting?
I mean, that all starts with Brian, who was fully committed to making sure that everybody was happy and was having a like joyful experience on set, in spite of, and maybe especially because of all the darkness. He's one of the brightest lights I've ever worked with. And he was 1,000%. He was like, that was one of his major jobs as he considered it on the set, is making sure that everybody was happy and thriving and doing well. And thank God, because we were all going through a lot, even just like off screen, like everybody, life is hard, the world is difficult. We don't need to also then be making things harder for everybody else on set. And it was tense. It was really tough. But I remember, especially by the time me and Brian get to our stuff together, then it just had set such a great tone for all of us to be able to go to a really deep and like intimate place together. But yeah, I sometimes feel like sometimes the darker the show is, the lighter everybody is when they call cut, because it's like you just have to release it.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to know who to root for on this show also because like nobody is really good. There are some people who are definitely bad, but like those the people shooting at the people we like, which is everybody on every side of the law. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of The Sopranos, that I think was the final episode where like the FBI guy's like, we're gonna win, and he doesn't mean the FBI, he means New Jersey mob versus New York mob. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, I don't think that Mina is quite as soft as that. I think she definitely has more principles, but also I think being undercover does something to a person.
1,000%. 1,000%. Actually, when I was working on Justified, I was doing ride-alongs with this a woman who is an undercover cop in Chicago. And we talked a lot about like how weird it is because you can be, especially where she was, you can be undercover and you see people that you know, and you have to sort of be like, don't talk to me or whatever. I was like, how do you handle that? And she's like, they usually, if they call my name and I don't respond, they know what I do for a living. So they figure that and then they usually leave because they're like, I probably shouldn't be here if there's undercover cops. But it is that thing, like you're in your life and not in your life. Like it absolutely is. We talked about that a lot too, that like you're sort of, that's a particular kind of, that has a particular appeal for some people, I think, who have a life they're happy to leave for a stretch of time, and are sort of hiding in some way or other. But it's one of the great things, I mean, about the show, that even, Brian and Wagner's characters are, those two actors are charm machines, but also you're they feel bad about what they did. You know, they're trying to sort of make things better. They're not, we see what they're trying to do, and they got in over their heads, and they were trying not to hurt anybody. And it definitely is I do think it's a lot about, the show is a lot about kind of the system that we're operating inside of, and how it's not necessarily like, here are the good guys, here are the bad guys. We're all trying to navigate this system that is broken and flawed, and how do you orient yourself ethically and morally inside of that?
I do think it's clearly compelling, but I am curious, based on your experience with research and ride-alongs, etc., how realistic you think this kind of premise is.
You mean the thing about what Brian and Wagner are doing, or the thing of like just the whole setup in general about like they're them looking for these guys and whatever?
Both, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, when we had a lot of like consultants that we spoke to, and I do think that those organizations, those like the smaller systems of law enforcement and DEA and FBI and all of these things, like that, they are so insular in so many ways, that I do think, because you are isolated in large ways from your family and friends, or there are things you can't talk to your family or your friends, you can't talk to your spouse about a lot of this stuff. So of course partners get really close, of course lines get crossed, and then of course, because that is your blood, then when something happens to somebody or whatever, like, yeah, it's the same fight of like, you know, the bureaucracy of the thing is just trying to close that case. And then people who lost someone close to them, they have a different, you know, end goal here. And I do think that like being isolated in that way, like what we're watching is like Mina, especially the way the show is built, where we're watching like Mina's journey and Ray's journey, they're isolated more and more and more from everything else in their lives. And yeah, like we know that when that happens to people, you have blinders on, and that just becomes, it's like an obsession, I think 1,000%. But I do think that a lot of this stuff is to me, it seems pretty realistic in terms of speaking with people, where it's like what you're talking about, you can't go home and talk about what your day at work was with anybody. You know, you get very sort of focused in, and that can easily become a laser beam.
Well, I want to pause to make sure that those watching have seen the finale, as we'll dive into some events here. And I think I don't know what I expected for an ending, because I think this was billed as a limited series. I'm not sure it should be a limited series anymore. Like that's, but I don't know what I expected, and it certainly was not this. So I'm curious how it first hit you when you read this, and what you think could be next, if there should be a next, or if this is like the perfect cliffhanger to leave the show off on forever.
Yeah, I mean, Peter had told me early on that he was like, it's going to end up being you and Brian. And I was like, how? Like, I really couldn't imagine it. And I think it's kind of brilliant. And it moves me very much, the two of them sitting in a space together. And especially in what you're talking about, where it's like there's no good guys or bad guys. And so how sort of how easily it's like, wait a minute, like we're not operating like she actually, what's amazing to me also is like for a number of episodes, she's not even working on the case anymore officially, period. So I mean, I remember talking to the armor, and he was like, we were doing a session before the show started shooting, and he's like, let me go through with you, you know, how you would do a raid or whatever. And I was like, bro, I don't, not only do I never do a raid, but I don't even work for the department after I don't work for the first half of the show. I'm benched. I'm doing my own, I've got my own thing going on. You know what I mean? I was like, and then I come back and I'm like, I'm still rogue basically in terms of my mind. And that was always something that was fascinating to me, is I was like, right, Ray is increasingly on his own. I'm on my own. And so, yeah, ultimately, I think the show is like, you need someone. You can't actually go through life by yourself. I think that's a little bit what the show was to me. And they're kind of, and then I see them really cling to each other. I'm hopeful because I love Brian and I love Peter. And I think that Peter, I can't say anything, but I think he has some cool ideas about what a second season would be. There was a minute early on where he was like, yeah, I'm not sure what it would be if we had a second season. And then as we were making the show, he was like, oh, I have some cool ideas. And so I'd be excited. I think it would definitely be it wouldn't like I don't think there's a world where it would ever just like pick up where we left off. I think there would be some cool way that Peter would imagine us into a little bit of time down the road or a different location or whatever. But I love those people so much. And I think I'm really a huge like believer in those two men and their talent. And I would be so excited if they got to dream up something for these people, because I really was so excited by these characters. I don't think I'd seen characters like this before. It does make me think about like other shows, but that's because I'm looking for like, well, what's a comp to these people and how kind of desperate and funny they are. And that to me is exciting. So I hope that there's more for it, because I just love them and want to work with them more. And I'm excited at what they would dream up, because I didn't see the ending coming. So I'm like, what could they do next? I don't even know.
Only thing is, I think it probably would not involve raids for your, at least not legal raids for your
Oh,
character.
not legal
That's
raids.
the only disappointment, right?
I think I could say probably not legal raids. Yeah. Although, listen, maybe she'll put on an FBI jacket with him and they'll do some fake ones in, some other
I
part
love
of
it.
the country. I have no idea. But I would be so curious what it would be. But yeah, I love these guys. I love the show so much. And it was such a delight.
Well, I mentioned Sneaky Pete before, and I have to confess, I love the show. I'm especially excited to see Giovanni recently turned to cinematography. Strange Darling, that was really, really cool.
Yeah.
But I took a road trip with my wife in the summer of 2018, and I had a list of like 6 or 7 shows that I was like, I'm one episode into season 3 of Sneaky Pete, and I never kept going. I still have to go back and finish the show, and it's like I love the show, but as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing that like I never I kept going with it. But that show also felt very unique because it was such a really was a crime drama, but there's this like comedic suspension of disbelief that like how do people not realize that this guy is not who's saying who it is, and it just feels like it must have been a lot of fun to make.
It was Giovanni and we were making the pilot. I remember we were like we had such a great sort of creative chemistry together. And I remember in the pilot, we were both like, just to like make sure we're on the same page as we make this thing, like, what's your ideal for what this like would be like your ideal comp for us? And I'm like the show, and we both said moonlighting. So we both were like moonlighting that, and we both were like, great, we're on the exact same page. And so that was always in our heads in terms of like their relationship, the sort of sparkiness, the fun of the whole thing. Um, that gave us like a great kind of North Star in terms of like, yeah, like it should be fun and cool and have an element of silliness to it. And he is that he is that in a nutshell. He's always game to go out on a limb, be silly, be the butt of the joke, but also he's so smart as an actor. And it makes sense to me how much he knows about cinematography, because I don't know if I've ever worked with anybody who like, he grew up on camera also, but like who understands. I think I understand what the camera's doing, and then I see what he's up to, and I'm like, there were things he would do sometimes, on set, and I'd be like, what is he doing over there? And then I would see the scene later and be like, he knew that he could see all the angles in his head as we were making it. It was really cool. But he was always talking about that's a passion of his for forever. So I'm so happy that he got to actually like be kind of official in that way. It's really cool.
Well, hearing you talk earlier about, the more serious things are, in the project, the lighter things are on set. I was thinking back to, I think it was a remark you made during a Q&A at Sundance after Eileen, and a very upsetting scene. That movie also like has its own vibe. I think it's a lot different than what people expect, but also hardly your most uplifting and sunny part.
Oh my God. Listen, I have played more than one lady tied to a pole in a basement at this point. And but I think that one will be hard to beat as the darkest thing I've ever done. I almost didn't even want to do that part because I had read the book, and when I found out that it was like they're like Mrs. Polk, I was like, oh my God. When I read that book, I got to that part and I like threw the book across the room. I was just like, um, and really like talking to Will Oldroyd beforehand, I was like, oh, this is the guy for this job because he's so kind, he's so open, and he's so gentle and smart that I was like, this is gonna, I will feel taken care of in terms of what I need as a performer in this scenario. Because that was a situation where I was like, we need to do this at the beginning of the workday, which was like midnight or something, it was overnight. It was insane. And I was like, we need to start with that. I'm not going to keep doing it like after lunch, like we got to start with it. I think we did it 3 times, 2 or 3 times through, and then maybe once or twice from a different angle. And then it was like, we're done, like it was like the end. And there's an amazing picture that I think maybe like the DP took when we were like done with the scene. And I'm tied to the thing, spoiler alert, like blood all over me. And Will and I are like, I'm still tied to the thing and I'm like laughing hysterically. Like, I think when he was like, we got it, we're done. I'm just like it just laughing hysterically, just a full on release of all of that. But it's funny, you mentioned Light from Light and Jim Gaffigan. That was an incredible experience in terms of the balance of the things. I think it was part of why that part really appealed to Jim, because that part really, there's not, the movie has some humor, but that character doesn't really. But the fact that we also used to talk about, I was like, what's amazing is what you get for free is what we associate with Jim. And so we actually think that we see how far this character has come as a character, even though we never meet him before he's grieving. We experience that we're like, look how sad Jim Gaffigan is. You know what I mean? And so we actually, for free, feel like we see how much he's lost from his life because we see him in this other way. But on set, Jim, like the second they called cut, he was like the funniest person I've ever been around in real life. And I don't know that you always expect that with stand-ups. Like sometimes I think they can be relatively dark or not really necessarily looking for a laugh. And Jim was the funniest person I've ever been around in real life. Like it was actually a challenge to not be laughing all the time with him because he was such a silly dude. But anyway, I just had to also say that because that made me think of that, where I was like, talk about the lightest guy in the world on like the darkest job. But yeah.
Well, I'd also say, I don't know if you've seen Linoleum, but I think that's another great
Oh
Jim, like
yeah.
serious performance that like you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily expect. And as somebody who doesn't watch a lot of stand-up, I think it's not like I know he's funny and I've seen him in funny parts, but just interesting to have those two films to look at side by side.
Yeah, yeah. He's a tremendous actor. He's a tremendous actor for sure.
I'd also say I really avoid horror, and so Light from Light is like an interesting because like it's the kind of thing where you're like, well, you read it, you're like, this could be horror, and I, specifically have not seen stuff like Birth Rebirth because I feel like that is not what I want to be seeing.
Yeah,
But Light from Light, I think, occupies a very interesting space where it's like there could be something coming out at you, but instead it's a deeper sort of meditation on grief, which is really cool.
that's right. I told a lot of people, I was like, nobody gets hurt. There's no scary stuff. There's no jump scares. It might feel tense, but there's no jump scares. Don't worry. We're not going to trick you into anything, because I was like, then maybe you watch it. Yeah.
But am I right on Birth Rebirth, or should I give that one a
Here's
try?
what I would say about Birth Rebirth. Birth Rebirth has no like jump scare stuff. There's some, I guess what we call in the business body horror, but it's not super extreme and you will see it coming all a mile away. It's like, because she's works in the morgue and stuff like that. I think you should give it a try. You'll see when it's not like scary, it's more like gross, where it's like you'll see like an exposed piece of an arm or whatever. It's creepy, but I think it's really funny, and it's very, very funny. And I think it's much more about like these two women and this sort of relationship to motherhood. But I think you should give it a try because the performances are so amazing. Judy Reyes is incredible, and this little girl it's great. It's great. I think Rita Wool, it's like, I think it's so great. And I think that Laura Moss would not think I was misspeaking to say like, I think actually some hardcore horror fans are disappointed because it's not like that. So I think you
That's
should
what
give
that's
it.
what I like. That's what I like to hear. That's what I like
Yeah,
to hear. The
exactly.
disappointment for the hardcore fans.
Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
maybe a slight lull between Emmy and Oscar season. Got to finish season 3 of Sneaky Pete, then Birth Rebirth, and then some other stuff. Well,
Don't
I'm
watch The Dark and the Wicked though.
okay.
That that one I can't even. I mean, I don't like to watch myself anyway, but I could get about 5.5 minutes in probably, and then I'm like, oh, we're out. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, speaking of things I don't watch, I'm pretty silent into the movie TV world, and I always like to look up who I'm talking to because, like, I know what you're from, but apparently you also do a lot of theater, which is really great. Do you feel like you have a starkly different approach to theater versus something that's going to be filmed?
No, I mean, the big difference is in theater, you're rehearsing with everybody for weeks. And in TV and film, often that is sort of your own private work. And maybe you seek out other collaborators outside of that. And maybe you have, if you're lucky, you get to come in a week early or so and you have some, but it's very, very isolated prep work and you sort of find it together on the day. But otherwise, no. I mean, theater really is about the fact that the writer is paramount. So you really are just like digging into that language and that's all you have to guide you. And you're kind of creating the landscape that the audience, and you're telling the audience where to look instead of the editor. Um, but it's part of why it's fun to go back and forth. I'm doing this thing with John Bernthal right now that he just made this, he's creating this theater company in Ojai where he lives. And he had asked me if I would do this play Ironbound that I did before with him to open the theater company. So we're rehearsing that right now. And John in particular, he's like, this means the most to me, bringing like theater, which really saved him, to this community that means so much to him. And we talk about it all the time. It's like, it's like if somebody was like, how is like taking a Pilates class, like going for a run, and you're like, you're both moving your body, but there's such different muscle groups. They're almost not even comparable because it's like totally different muscle groups, big muscle, little muscles, all these things. So I like going back and forth.
Besides Ironbound, what's next for you? What do you have coming up?
Oh gosh, right now I have a bunch of things that are about to come out. So I did this show, His and Hers, with John. That's how we met. That's a Netflix thing with Tessa Thompson that Will Oldroyd also created. That is coming out. So I started this John Wayne Gacy Devil in Disguise show for Peacock that's coming out soon. The Materialist Celine Song's movie is coming out in June. So I have a lot of things that are like tumbling out right now. And as for work stuff, I am in the middle of this play right now and sort of shuffling some things around to see where some other things land. But yeah, right now I'm excited to see all of this stuff come out.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine you may be too busy, but are you watching anything on TV right now that you really like?
Oh my gosh. I feel so crazy right now because I'm deeply behind. I I yeah, I'm too behind right now to even. I was like rewatching like The Bear. Like I was rewatching. I watched like rewatched I was like doing my research, watching all of John's stuff, being like, let's get deep into John's oeuvre, like I did see The Accountant too, which was wonderful, very fun, funnier than the first one. So I'm not watching a ton of TV right now, but I have a deep, deep list of things that I need to get to.
Well, it's not TV, but it is Deep John. Have you seen Sweet Virginia?
No.
Oh, that's a good one. Him and Christopher Abbott. Great. I think it was at Tribeca years
Oh
ago,
my
but a
gosh,
great
next on my
choice.
list. Next on my list.
Very
Thank you
good.
for
Dark, but not horror, nothing like that. But
great. I'm
definitely
I'm a
not dope,
lightweight.
not dope thief fun. It's definitely more serious.
Great, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This was such a pleasure, and I look
Thank
forward to. I'm sure we'll talk
you.
again. You have so much coming out. We'll talk again at some point
Thank
about
you so
something.
much,
So
Abe.
good
I
luck with it all.
appreciate it. Thanks.